Hello and welcome back. I'm Carlos Rosado, editor of Yucatán Magazine. Today with us we have the author of this fantastic book, Mayan Ruins Revisited in the Footsteps of Teobert Maler. Please welcome William Frej.
Thank you for inviting me. I look forward to our conversation.
So my understanding is you're from the Chicago area originally?
Originally Chicago, left Chicago in '73 and made my way out to California for graduate school, Berkeley, and from then on, it was a journey of many, many places throughout the world. I first came to the Yucatan in 1972. Studied Mayan architecture at the University of Arizona, where I was an architecture student, and visited the Yucatan in '72. In fact, in the book, there are a number of photographs taken early on in that period in the early '70s. And I've always had a real place in my heart for not only the culture, but also the architecture. And the focus on Teobert Maler in this book, I think it'd be worth spending a minute talking about. At the visitor center in Chichen Itza in 1972, there was a small photograph that was taken by Teobert Maler. And I still remember it to this day. And the way the photo was set up, his eye, his vision, really, really impressed me. And, you know, I've kept thinking about Maler for many, many years. Unfortunately, he was really unrecognized, even though I think he was probably the best historical photographer of the Maya that was working in his day and up until this point in time. And so when we bought our house here in Merida and were looking for a project, my wife and I decided to attempt to find Maya sites that Maler had originally discovered. Over 100 Maya sites in the Puc region in Yucatan, as well as Campeche and further south. And we, along with a colleague archaeologist here in Merida, Dan Griffin, who had a nice four-wheel drive vehicle, we spent almost 7 years going out, rediscovering Maya sites and photographing them. And hopefully, you know, our intent was to put these in a book because his photographs are rarely published, and I think him to be recognized by the broader photographic community as well as the broader world that has an interest in Maya archaeology, I think was very important, and that's what we pursued for a number of years, and the book was an outcome of that.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that I find really impressive about the book is the breadth and depth of it, right? So many books that you find on the Maya, they'll concentrate on Tikal, Copan, you know, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, if you're lucky. But here you really go in depth and really looking at a lot of very, really great examples of different types of architecture, especially here in Yucatan, of course, because it's the lowland, the Puc, but we have some real Bec in there, we have some Chenes. Do you have a particular style of Mayan architecture that you favor?
Well, both Puc architecture, as well as that transitional period between Puc that you typically find in the Yucatan and Chenes. And Maler, I think, captured in his photography the focus on both of those areas dramatically, from El Tabasqueño in the south to a number of small sites.
El Tabasqueño, ironically, in Campeche.
In Campeche, yeah. And it was, you know, I think it was important for us to really try to have as much of a wide spectrum perspective as we could on the architecture. But apart from architecture per se, looking at the settlement patterns, I don't think many people realize, you obviously do with your background, but there was a Maya settlement or city approximately every 10 to 15 kilometers from the north of the Yucatan all the way down to the south of Guatemala. And many connected with stock bays, with the highways that connect cities. And I think most people, they view Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Kaba, Labna, Sayul, as sort of one-offs, and that really encompasses for them the whole
what the civilization was.
and it's so much more than that. And when you get out with your machetes and you're tromping through the jungle trying to find these places, I mean, it's remarkable what's out there.
I always try to highlight to people that, for instance, it's not that Chichen Itza isn't important, but Chichen Itza is as well known as it is because it's exactly halfway between Merida and Cancun along a major highway, right? I mean, it's not to say that there's nothing special about Chichen Itza. There's certainly a lot that is special, but there's just so much more out there. It's just, even for somebody who's spent a great deal of their lives, such as yourself, you never run out of sites to visit. I mean, that's both the curse and the wonder of it, right?
No, you're absolutely right. And discovery takes place all the time.
All the time.
I mean, our last sojourn in the Yucatan last year, we ended up reporting 4 different sites to INA that they had no record of. And the further you dig into the history and read and research and then go out and test it in the field, which is something that LiDAR does not do.
That's right.
You're going to find a remarkable environment of extraordinary Mayan architecture.
During the pandemic, there were a group of cyclists around Tizinin that were just, fed up with not being able to leave the house and just started cycling around and doing mountain biking, and just made some remarkable finds that are just really so impressive. And again, drive home that point that there's, till this day, so much that we haven't found. And people have this idea that LiDAR is the end-all and be-all of exploration, but it really isn't. I mean, it's going to tell you about the temperature of the stone and give you a rough idea of perhaps what it's made of, but nothing near the resolution where you'll be like, oh my goodness, we have poop cylinders adorning the facade or stuff like that.
Yeah, you need ground truthing, and that's why people like yourself, me, our colleagues, I think what we're doing is very, very important. And I think LiDAR is important,
of course,
but it's not the end-all be-all, as you stated. And I think you're going to find with LiDAR more and more discoveries, but you've got to get out and see these sites in person.
And do the science.
And exactly.
One thing that I've found very intriguing with recent discoveries with LiDAR is we keep kind of revising and pushing back our ideas of chronology. I grew up with an idea, even in public school here, that you have the Olmec as the mother civilization, and then you go on to the Maya, and then from then on you go to the Aztec and Toltec. And of course, this is something I talk about often because it's a bit of a pet peeve, right? But they did not identify themselves as, members of the same people. A Maya from Ikbalam would find virtually nothing in common with somebody from El Puente. Might see more akin with someone from La Venta, right? So that's very important. But also, it really is making us change our ways in which we think of migration patterns. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Settlement patterns, what's interesting to me is more in the present than in the past. One of the essayists in my book, Jerry Sabloff, who is a world-renowned Mayan archaeologist, the one question that drives him crazy, and certainly me, is a question he gets all the time. Why did the Maya disappear? And of course they didn't.
Yeah.
And you talked about settlement patterns. After the classic period, apart from Chichen and Mayapan primarily, the Maya did not disappear. They dispersed.
Mm-hmm.
And today, there's over 3 million pure Maya-speaking people in Yucatán, Campeche, and Guatemala. And the settlement patterns, I think, they're hard to define, but clearly the Maya did not disappear. And, in Kiwik, Tomas Galarreta Negron.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, Tomas also wrote the foreword to the book. He and his colleagues, Bill Ringel and George Bay, they're doing a lot of work right now on settlement patterns within the Kiwik region.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what they're coming up with is going to be some remarkable finds about how in fact the Maya lived, how they dispersed, where they went after 900 more or less. And I think if we should be doing all we can to dissuade this notion of the Maya disappeared.
Yeah.
They didn't.
Absolutely. There's some even extraordinary outlier cases of Mayan city-states in Guatemala being founded after contact with Europeans. So is it Ixinche or Mixco Viejo? I think it's Ixinche. That in their stelae where they tell of the foundation of the city, they talk about the Europeans coming and giving them horses and weapons and the alliances they forged. So this is like, well into the beginnings of
1500s.
Exactly, when you still have the foundation of these new city-states, to say nothing of the people which, for instance, like Sa, who returned to northern Guatemala and resettled Lake Chichen Itza, and there's sites out there like Motul, which date from roughly the same period, not quite as late, but still from the same period when these people had returned
Mm-hmm.
from the far off reaches of the northern Yucatan Peninsula. So that really gives us a lot to think about. But I think you're right. I think really it sometimes gets a little bit annoying to have to drive that point home so many times. But yeah, they didn't go anywhere. They're still here.
I don't know about when you were going to school early on, and not university, but grade school,
Mm-hmm.
high school. Where I went to school, we learned nothing about the Maya, Mesoamerica. It was always focused toward Europe.
Of course, I went to school here.
That's right.
So.
Yeah. So you probably had a different experience. But
Right.
I think many North Americans, what we're taught about this part of the world is almost non-existent, and it's a real shame. And that was another reason we wanted to do this book, because I think if people read this, it will certainly expand their knowledge and interest of this part of the world, a very important part of the world.
So this book, which we have here, Mayan Ruins Revisited, is the first in a series of books that you've been working on. After that, you worked on another book here in the Mesoamerican region. Could you tell me just a little bit about that?
Sure. That book is called Seasons of Ceremonies, Rites and Rituals in Guatemala and Mexico. And I was very interested in doing this book, and at the same time, we wanted to complement the architectural focus that Maya Ruins Revisited has
Mm-hmm.
with the number of very, very important ceremonies, primarily Mayan in Guatemala and Mexico. And that book depicts, it's a black and white photography book, but it depicts 14 different ceremonies. And one of the most important is Rabinal.
Mm-hmm.
which is in the Central Highlands in Guatemala, which is the only place left certainly in the Mayan world, that performs a ceremony called the Achi, and it's all in Maya, and it takes place over 3 days of reciting this entire book. Another important ceremony depicted by the Seasons of Ceremonies book is the Samana Santa event in Santa Teresa, Nayarit, Mexico. And it's a pre-Hispanic 4-day event that takes place in this very, very remote village in the highlands of the Sierra de San Francisco in Nayarit. And we were there in 2019 with a Mexican anthropologist who you may know, Marina Aguirre, who does trips. And she and I and my wife spent a week there, photographed the event. And we were going back the next year, and then COVID hit. But in 2 weeks, we're going back with the 2 essayists who wrote the essay about Santa Teresa, Frey Castillo Badillo and Ted Coyle, to spend another week there, do more photography, and really try to encompass every aspect of this ceremony. But to give you one short example, in the church, there's a Catholic priest in the village who has no relationship to the church. He says Mass in his own house. In the church, the involvement there is purely the indigenous people, and the Kora is the indigenous group. But on Holy Thursday, they build a wooden pyramid with an altar at the top in the middle of the church, and it's a large church. Good Friday, 12 o'clock, the church is stormed by the Barados, the forbidden ones, and they completely tear down the church as a symbolic episode, not only for Christ's crucifixion on Good Friday, but also the elimination of this pyramid within this church, which goes way back to pre-Hispanic times. And to see this is one of the most remarkable things that I have ever done in my life.
One thing that really struck me about Mayan Ruins Revisited was the way that you counterposed Teobert Maler's photographs with your own. This is something which, I mean, it's been done before, but I'd never frankly seen it done quite as expertly as in this book. So really congratulations on that. I'm aware that also won you several awards.
The book, it's won 16 major awards, including 5 Photography Book of the Year awards from everyone from the International Photography Awards to Forward Indies, and which I'm very thankful for. I think it's a recognition of a book that's somewhat different, but strong photographically. And,
well, you put so much of your heart and soul into something.
Yeah.
It's nice to get a little recognition now and then.
And, a point on the Mahler photographs, if I may, this wasn't a re-photography project.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I really didn't reference Mahler's photographs for a number of these sites before I took my own photographs. But interestingly, it happened that in many of these photos that I took, I was standing in the same place as Mahler was to get that same image. That the vision that he had was very similar to mine, and that was basically unplanned, but the outcome was very interesting to me as a photographer.
Yeah, that's serendipity right there, isn't it?
It is.
I understand that you have another book on the Himalaya region called On Top of the World or something like this, and you are also now currently working on the 4th book. This will be the fourth book in 4 years. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Himalaya book travels across the roof of the world, a Himalayan memoir. And the Himalayan region, for both my wife and I, was and still is very important to us. And we've been traveling there for 40 years. Our first trip was in 1981. And the book, it's somewhat of a departure for me because I'm a black and white photographer, but we wanted to do this in color. And over the years, we've amassed 45 to 50,000 Kodachrome 25 slides, and they were really used as the basis for this book, which continued up until 2020. Actually, was our last trip there. But it's a beautiful book on the Himalayan, and it encompasses Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tibet, Ladakh, Zanskar.
And what about the book that you're working on currently?
And the book now the title is called Blurred Boundaries, Perspectives on Rock Art in the Greater Southwest.
Mm.
And it's a black and white photography book. It's a fine art photography book with a brilliant essay by Polly Shaftsma, who I think is the most iconic rock art archaeologist still living today. And we're very excited about the book, and it will be out in October. The three books, Maya, Seasons of Ceremonies, and the Himalaya, are carried here in Merida by Between the Lines bookstore. And I'm very thankful for that because Juanita has really embraced the work, and she's done I think an extraordinary job at marketing these books for me.
As is, of course, Mayan Ruins Revisited.
Yeah, exactly. And the books can also be found under my name at bookshops and through the distributors as well as online. But for those, for those in Merida, Between the Lines is the place to go. For sure.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and keep up the amazing work, and I'm looking forward to see the next book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. Appreciate it very much.
A real pleasure. Please like and subscribe. We are a growing channel, and every subscription really helps us out a lot.